Echelon is brought to you by Deloitte for innovative thinking and thorough strategic planning. Turn to Deloitte. And we have the executive chair of Kgalagadi Manganese in studio today. Welcome, Daphne. Daphne Mashile and Nkosi.
Thank you for inviting me.
Let's start off with Daphne, the person, not the businesswoman. Yeah. Your grandfather, I believe, was a miner?
Yes, my grandfather was a miner from the town of Pilgrim's Rest. She worked for the Transvaal Gold Mining Enterprises.
Okay, so would you say mining was in your blood?
I think mining was in my blood, but I didn't know then.
Okay. Yeah. You're a renowned women's rights activist, and particularly for rural women.
Yes.
Share some pivotal moments in your formative years that proved to shape you.
I think what proved to shape me is that I was brought up by a single mother. And as I grew up, I saw how she was actually taken for granted, even though she was actually good, intelligent, beautiful. And I think that sort of shaped me a bit to say, wow, she's pretty, very light, fair in complexion, prettier than me. And if she has these challenges, what about me? So I have to work 3 times, 4 times, 5 times more. And I think as I was growing up, becoming a young woman, young mother, getting married, young wife, I was already, fighting for my rights, fighting for my space. And I think that shaped me a bit. How she struggled to actually put us, into a home, a roof over our head, working for the textile industry to actually make sure that we go to school. The 4 of us, 2 boys and 2 girls. And I realized that sometimes she would actually buy, a half a loaf of bread and eat it for the whole week so that she can be able to give us money for buses to go to school. My father was not there. And therefore, I realized that there was so much more that women bring into bringing up, the family structure. And I think somewhere in my subconscious, I remember some of those things. And that's what made me to actually fight for the rights of women. Over and above that, the reason why she actually came to Joburg was because my grandfather realized that she was married to my father, but my father never came home. And here was this young, beautiful woman with children staying at home in Pilgrim's Rest. The husband is staying in Johannesburg, doesn't care about the children. And my grandfather gave my mother money to actually got her and us into a taxi and say, go to your husband, find him wherever he is, and, I can't take care of you anymore. And she struggled with us, a roof over our heads, medical aid, and so on and so forth. And she never went to school. I mean, standard 3, she was a seamstress working for the textile industry. I remember the first paycheck that I actually remember very well was 1 pound 6. And with that 1 pound 6, she had to pay for, because we didn't have a house at the time. We were lodging with some people. She had to pay for us. And I remember the first time my sister actually got a child. And we were kicked out because people were saying, you bring in 4 children and now there's a 5th one. And she had to struggle to actually look for accommodation for us. And we were moving, from one, home to another. One day we are in Mufulo, the next day we are in Pefeni, the other day we are in Naledi and Mapetla. And I have lost count of the places where we actually stayed when we were growing up. And sometimes how you explain it to your fellow, pupils or students or friends at school that today you are in this bus, the next day you are in a train. You can't really explain it. Why don't you have a house? My mother has a house, is a doctor, is a nurse, and you actually don't belong somewhere, somehow. And I think those are some of the things that actually made me who I am.
Mm. You've, from a rights activist point of view, I know you've lobbied very much for traditional marriages to be placed on the same or equal footing as the civil marriage laws that we have in this country. Are you aware of the latest changes that are being proposed to the Traditional Courts Bill? And what are your thoughts on that?
I think I lobbied a lot simply because my mother was married in customary law. But fortunately, it was registered in her ID book. And when my father died staying in Winterfeld, where we didn't know, and we were called to come and bury him and so on. And I saw the the pain that my mother went through, that suddenly you have this corpse that you have to bury, that never looked after your children, but because you were married, customary law, you had no rights, but you now have to, pop out money and make arrangements and so on. But also, my father had shops, some, that we don't know where they are, who inherited them, and so on and so forth. And I think that actually shaped my, interaction with the rural women's movement, one, customary law and the minority status of African women. And I campaigned a lot to say, if I can bring up children and look after these cows, if I want to sell one cow to pay school fees for the children, I must be given the rights to actually do that, because by the time that my husband left, there were 2 cows, and he comes back in December. There's 10 or 15, People must recognize the role that I've actually played in building up, the assets, if you like. So for me, those were some of the things that really I was asking myself these questions and said, I think there's something wrong here. And that is why in 1993, 94, we actually made presentations to the Justice Minister, Dala Omar, where we brought women from different areas to actually make presentations using their own languages to express the minority status of African women under customary law and how they can actually input at that point in time into, legislation and policy in the country.
Are you involved at all with the latest changes to the traditional courts bill?
No, I'm not involved, but I'm still involved with the Women's National Movement of Rural Women as a founder member at the time, and having been the first national coordinator, as I go into business, realizing the challenges that they have in terms of raising capital. Wherever I go, I give them a percentage share in business so that they can, create a kitty so that they can continue with their projects. So that's what I do. Also, I've been a founder member of the Women's Development Bank, microfinance, microlending. I'm the chairperson of the trust. I chair the investment holdings to raise capital so that we can give loans to rural women to start income-generating projects. So I am involved with the rural women's movement from that point of view. I'm not involved on the advocacy side where you look at legislation and policy. But I did say it, I've not really applied my mind, but it's something that one would want to interact with and actually begin to understand, because one can identify and feel, because sometimes it's easy for us as urban women to prescribe to rural women. And my philosophy in life is that you must remember that rural as they are, they're as intelligent as you are. They've survived without you, and therefore when you go to them, you don't have a suitcase full of solutions. You actually have to, it's a two-way traffic. You learn from them, and they also actually learn from you as well.
Let's go to the business side of things now. From what I understand is that you were a director of Asizwe Coal. You were involved with the formation of Asizwe Coal, which later went on to become a very well-known company called Exaro Resources. Yes. There's been much criticism, especially now after the Marikana events, but there's been much criticism of the narrow BEE ownership in the mining sector. What are your thoughts around that?
I think my thoughts are around, let's go back to Asizwe. How I actually got to Asizwe is my, having worked with rural women in the Mpumalanga area. And because the coal assets that Asizwe acquired were in Mpumalanga, and I had been very vocal, active in the Mpumalanga area, Sipho approached me to say,
That's Sipho
Nkosi, no relation of mine or my husband's. I was seeing him for the first time, approached me and said, we're looking to start this new coal process. We're looking for people that can structure a company to meet, the conditions that were set out in terms of BE and so on. I've been told that you're actually good in putting structures together, of women, having worked with young people as well. And that's how it was, actually by accident. And I said to Sipho at the time, Sipho, I'm not a businesswoman. I'm just but a community worker. And that's how I started.
Was that your first mining deal?
It was my first mining deal. It was my first business deal. Of course, income generating project, selling fat cakes and selling this and that. It was something that, I grew up doing because my mother was seamstress, selling, dresses. And by the way, I never had new clothes. I used to buy second-hand clothes, and I was happy because my mother will, cut and make sure that I'm comfortable. I look as good as anyone else. And I think, I went into mining by accident. And if you look at the new coal opportunity, we actually worked hard. At the time we started, we had nothing. We were all listed in the credit bureau. I think we couldn't raise 3.5 million because the assets were 360 million, and we had to raise 1% of the total value so that the banks can actually fund you based on what you put in. And we struggled, but nevertheless we managed to raise the six of us 3.5 million, and that's how we started Sizwe. In terms of Nero BE, if you look at BE, the policy framework had given us as individuals an opportunity to participate, to prove ourselves that we can. Having said that, the BE changed over time. People thought, just empowerment versus enrichment versus entitlement and so on and so forth. Those were some of the challenges that are actually within BEE. For my understanding of BEE is that what you put in must be what you get out. You are given an opportunity to actually prove yourself. Nothing comes for mahala. You actually work hard. If you have to raise capital, that's how I see it. And for me, Nero BEE, of course, over time, it was a story of David versus Goliath, or a story of who knows whom and how. But the broad principles of BEE, for me, I subscribe to, I believe in, and it's only that the monitoring tools in terms of how do you monitor that it actually happens, then it's a different story altogether. Having said that, also the entitlement mentality in the country, not only in the mining sector, that because I am black, I'm entitled to X, I must be given this opportunity and that. I actually don't even have to lift my finger. It's something that I don't subscribe to. Everything that I've touched, everything that I've done, I've worked very hard. I never got it for free. No one can stand today to say, this is what I gave her. And that should be what we should, subscribe to as people in the country, to embrace the opportunities that we are being given and grab them with both hands so that we can continue to instill a culture of working hard to achieve the goals that you set yourself to achieve. Not that for as long as I know so and so, it's okay. Because you're beginning to see that even our own children. I have 4 children. I'm a mother. I'm a grandmother of 3 children. And I'm always worried. Sleepless nights I spend thinking about what is the quality of children that I'm bringing up. Am I instilling a culture of work, and work so that you can achieve your goals? Or am I saying to them, for as long as you know Lynn, it's okay. He'll give you the opportunities that you wake up overnight and become an instant millionaire, which, by the way, it's not sustainable. And if it's not sustainable, it creates its own problems and challenges, not for those individuals, but communities and the country as well.
Yeah. We've seen the events at the very tragic events at Marikana. We're seeing AngloGold reporting strikes this morning. Do you see this as a new dawn of a labour movement, a different labour movement in the country? And how do you see this being resolved?
I cannot speak on behalf of the labour movement, but sitting where I am sitting, I look at it and I say, if you look at the trade union movement from the 80s and the 90s, in terms of the transition into having one enemy in the 80s, a common enemy, and not having that common enemy anymore after the liberation of the country. Were they relevant? Are they still relevant in terms of what they actually give to the to their members? I think we need to actually debate and come up with solutions to say, are they still representing the workers at the workplace in terms of, what the needs of those workers are? And for me, I think there are gaps there that needs to be closed so that we can actually move forward. Being in the mining sector, fortunately for us, we are still in the development stage of the project. We worried, we concerned. We're not so concerned though, but because for me, I come from a background of community development, and we already at development phase. We've built crashes in the area that we're operating from. We've built a crash. We work with schools in the area. We don't wait for the integrated development plans and the social development plans as per the prescription of the mining charter and the mining petroleum development
MPRDA.
MPRDA, sorry.
No problem.
Yeah. So we actually look at gaps in the communities and say, what are the interventions that we can begin to look at? And for me, that's the way to go. You become a responsible corporate citizen. For me, I operate in the Northern Cape. I've always been asking myself, and the reason why I was attracted to actually go to the Northern Cape was that it's well endowed with mineral resources. It's the richest in terms of minerals, and it's the poorest. And if you look at the number of people in the Northern Cape, it's just over 1 million. So you actually ask yourself, if diamonds were found in the Northern Cape, manganese is found in the Northern Cape, iron ore is found in the Northern Cape, why are the communities so poor? Why mining started, the big hold is in the Northern Cape. What happened? And I think we're beginning to deal with some of those challenges, things that were never done, the backlog. People are beginning to see that it can change, it can actually give them opportunities, so that as you grow as an individual and as an individual company, you lift other people to grow with you as well, particularly the communities that are affected, not only by the mining in terms of the environmental issues, the social ills of society as well. As a responsible South African, you need to look at those things and be alive to them and say, what is it that we can actually begin to look at and make the necessary interventions.
Okay. You're busy constructing a 3 million ton per annum manganese mine. I know there are plans for a sinter plant as well as a smelter eventually. First production was scheduled for around about mid 2012. Where are you now in that process?
We have reached shaft bottom in terms of the mine. We're beginning to take out 600 at the moment. We're taking out something. So I can safely say, whilst we are in production, we're still busy with equipping the shaft, because for men and material on the main shaft. That's on the mine. We're ready to roll. On the sinter plant is being cold commissioned. Cold commissioning means that they're testing the machines itself. And we've done that. We're hoping to actually start hot commissioning end of October. And then we'll be in production. The sinter plant is ready to roll. The mine, we already have a stockpile of about 50,000 tons. And we think that by the beginning of November, we'll feed what we've taken out into the sinter plant to produce our first sinter. Of course, it will still be part of our hot commissioning, where we test the sinter product. Are we producing what we set out to produce? Is the machine in sync with the qualities of the ore that we're actually getting, and so on? So, if you like, the mine and sinter is already there.
Okay. The smelter, is that a realistic prospect given our electricity constraints and tariffs?
The smelter, it is realistic if you look at the fact that you're looking at incentives from a government perspective if you beneficiate. If you look at it from an Eastern Cape point of view, the fact that it will create jobs in the area. And if we work with government in terms of, we're looking at incentives that the DTI has come up with, where if you are in a strategic development zone, you're looking at incentives for your electricity, probably, incentives for actually the fact that you have a smelter in a strategic development zone. And we're looking at that, we working constantly putting, numbers into our model to actually look at the viability of not the viability of the smelter, but also whether are we going to be the lowest cost producer, because that is actually very important. If you are going to, compete with the best of the best, we're competing with Sarawak, where people get contracts in Sarawak in Malaysia of electricity at 2 cents per kilowatt for the next 30 years. And therefore, those are some of the things that we're actually beginning to look at. Of course, first prize would be actually for us to actually have a smelter in the Eastern Cape, because it will actually assist in creating jobs. But also it's in the port of Kruger, the most beautiful port, the biggest port that I've actually seen, 10 kilometer by 11 kilometer wide. And for us, we want to be there. We have a site there. We want to start with our bulk earthworks so that we can begin to build the smelter. Having said that, for us, if you look at the mine and the sinter plant, you perfect that, you focus, and once you've got that right, then you can continue, with your smelter.
Yeah. You've recently been involved with a court case with one of your partners, ArcelorMittal. They're a 50% partner in Kgalagadi. What are the issues there, and how do you see your partnership with them going forward?
Okay. The issues with ArcelorMittal is that when we brought in ArcelorMittal as a partner, we had a choice of 3 companies: Eramet, Comilog, which is the biggest manganese producer in the world, ArcelorMittal being the biggest steel producer, and China's Minmetals, the biggest consumer. We knew that either way, you're bringing a very big company, that you'll have challenges as you work with them, because they have their own culture of working. We are a small company. We're developing. We actually also made commitments in terms of how we're actually going to, empower women, empower black people to actually take strategic roles in the company. Having said that, the relationship started in 2007. I've managed to run the business up until now. Now it's the time when it's about product. It's about people wanting to take ownership of the project, because that's when the real money is coming. Having said that, these financial challenges that we've had in terms of them not wanting to put money, they've used corporate governance issues, they've used all sorts of issues. But the real issue is about who owns the rights to actually marketing the product, number one. Number two, now that they have their own challenges in terms of Kumba, they think that the challenges that they have with Kumba and everyone else are the same challenges. Suddenly you have a partner that has also become, in the process from 2007 up until now, in 2009, they took a strategic view that they are actually going into mining. So you suddenly have a competitor sitting with you in the same boardroom. So those were some of the challenges. The financial strategy of the company was approved by ArcelorMittal and us in a board meeting, in a shareholder meeting as well. So we are not doing anything that we were not asked to do. But in terms of them having their own international challenges, Europe, what it is today, having to honor their obligation as well, they're a big company. Of course, we'll expect them to have a lot of challenges. But if you have challenges and you have a partner, you go to your partner and say, you know what, I'm having international challenges. I can no longer afford to actually put money into the business. And you look at easier mechanisms of actually raising capital. You don't actually come back and say, no, because of corporate governance, I'm no longer honoring my obligation, but I'm as happy to actually own the shares. So those are some of the challenges. And we went to court. I went to court because I believed that, when you are a small company, there are perceptions, rightly or wrongly, that you have done something wrong. And I wanted the courts to actually exonerate us. And they have. We've gone 4 times. They've lost 4 times with costs.
Okay.
And as for me, it's not personal. Business, it's about robust debates in a boardroom. It's about fights for terrain and so on. And I've moved on. And they still are my partners. I'm still committed to them being my partners. I have no issues. And I'll continue to respect them as my fellow shareholders and partners. As for honoring the obligations, we all have the responsibility of making sure that we put what we promised into the business so that the business can continue.
All right. Just as in closing, you're going to be involved in the inaugural conference on junior mining and exploration to be held next month, or 6 to 8 November in Newtown in Johannesburg. I heard a disturbing comment made last night in a panel discussion at Weber Wenzel's, where one of their top guys actually said that exploration companies are virtually non-existent in South Africa. What do you think the landscape looks like for junior miners and exploration companies currently?
I think it's exploration companies is very difficult because you struggle with funding mechanisms. For instance, when we started, we had no funding at all. We went to the New Africa Mining Fund, they couldn't fund us.
But what is stopping the funding?
Well, they don't fund greenfields projects, period.
Too high a risk?
They believe it's high risk. You have to do something, a pre-feasibility study first, for them to actually fund you. If you look at the story of Kgalagadi, I started exploration. We didn't have money. I raised 12.5 million to do a pre-feasibility study out of my own pocket. And once I had a pre-feasibility study, even the IDC, development funding institutions, do not fund greenfields projects. And it's funding for exploration companies. If I didn't have the capacity to raise 12.5 billion, I wouldn't be sitting here as Kgalagadi Manganese. And I did that. I did a pre-feasibility study, and then I went to the IDC. I got 60 million to finish the bankable feasibility study that enabled me to actually bring in the likes of ArcelorMittal. So for me, exploration company, for as long as government is not focusing on that, for as long as there's no funding for it, I agree with that disturbing comment that, where do you get the money?
Thank you very much. That was Daphne Mashile Nkosi from Kgalagadi Manganese. This upper echelon feature was brought to you by Deloitte. For innovative thinking and thorough strategic planning, turn to Deloitte.
Thank you.